Somewhere in the misty mountains of West Virginia, a massive Gothic stone building materializes out of the tree line. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum began as a visionary attempt to heal. For over a century, thousands walked through its sprawling corridors expecting treatment, only to find that the institution was a runway destination. Their entire lives were reduced to a single stark number carved into a block. This architectural marvel, built to preserve human dignity, eventually transformed into a machine designed to erase it. In 1858, the building followed a visionary layout. The architect designed these long, sprawling wings to flood every ward with sunlight and fresh air, believing that the environment itself acted as a form of medicine. But the building was soaked in violence before the first patients arrived. During the Civil War, construction stopped as soldiers occupied the half-built shell, turning the intended sanctuary into a raided military camp. Once it opened, the asylum became a convenient dumping ground for anyone society deemed inconvenient, from those suffering from epilepsy to women who refused to follow the rigid domestic expectations of the 19th century. The building was engineered with a strict limit. This baseline represents the designed capacity of 250 patients, the maximum number the staff could humanely care for. But the doors never stopped opening. By the 1950s, the population had exploded to nearly 2,400 people. This overcrowding destroyed the original therapeutic design. Beds were jammed into every available corridor, wardrooms became windowless warehouses, and the fresh air ran out. When a medical system breaks under this much mathematical rate, actual therapy becomes impossible. The facility was forced to shift its entire focus, from healing the mind to simply controlling the crowd. Administrative failure dictated a new strategy: behavior management. Since an understaffed facility couldn't treat thousands of individuals, the primary goal became keeping the wards quiet and manageable. When physical space and professional staff were exhausted, the facility turned to primitive methods of restraint to handle difficult or violent patients. The isolation cells still hold these rusted iron rings, bolted directly into the stone. They were used to chain humans to the walls like animals, when the system had no other way to contain them. By the 1940s, the superintendent's reports reflected a total collapse of hope. After years of pleading for state funding that never came, he recorded a final, exhausted question in his official log: "Why am I doing this?" Systemic neglect turned the medical staff into wardens. In a facility this dangerously over capacity, violence and restraint became the only tools available to keep the building from descending into total chaos. To manage the population, the facility adopted the transorbital lobotomy. In a routine procedure taking only minutes, doctors inserted an instrument through the eye socket to sever the frontal lobe, permanently destroying the patient's personality and emotional function. Electroconvulsive treatment was also widely utilized. While intended as a therapy, it was often administered as a punitive tool to subdue unruly individuals and keep the ward silent. Doctors used insulin shock therapy to manage the sheer volume of bodies, plunging patients into deliberately induced weeks-long comas just to keep them immobilized. When surgical and shock methods reached their limits, massive doses of thorazine provided a final layer of chemical control. It wasn't used to cure psychosis, but to sedate the population until the wards fell silent. These mid-century treatments effectively solved the problem of overcrowding. They silenced the noise, but they did so by systematically erasing the memory, identity, and humanity of everyone inside. After a newspaper investigation exposed the unlivable conditions inside, the asylum was finally abandoned in 1994, leaving behind a 906-door monument to psychiatric failure. The building sat empty for over a decade, but when the current owner began her first walkthrough of the property, she witnessed 40 of those heavy doors slam shut in unison. There was no wind, and no one else was in the building. Modern investigators have since documented thousands of anomalies. These reports are unique for their consistency. Regardless of when or where they visit, investigators record responsive, communicative presences rather than random echoes. On the 4th floor, a child patient named Lily is frequently thought through physical interactions. Investigators have found birds rolling across the floor on command, stopping directly at the feet of visitors, as if inviting them to play. The rolling birds, the slamming doors, and the voices captured on audio display a consistent point of intent. This level of responsiveness suggests the inhabitants are still fighting to be recognized by anyone who walks through the door. Today, tourists walk the warrens where over 2,000 nameless bodies remain buried just outside the stone walls. Historians point out that these patients were systematically stripped of their names and life, forced to identify as members, and rendered entirely voiceless by the institution. For a population whose identities were buried under numbers, the act of making themselves heard is a physical rebuttal to the numbered bricks in the glass. Every recorded response and slam of a door echoes against a century of forced silence. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum failed to give these people dignity while they were alive. In that, however, the inhabitants are making absolutely certain they will never be forgotten.